Attraction sacrifices earn you brilliant moves. They look beautiful. They're unexpected. And most importantly, they put a big smile on your face. These concepts and tactics are applicable to players of all levels. I go through removing the defender, the key idea of tempo, and I'll show you the most common attraction sacrifice that you can use in your own games. Okay, we're starting this game. We can see that white is taking a ton of space over here on the king side, but he also has a pretty weak king going on right here on h3. What's his king doing right there? I'm not really sure, but what am I going to do? I'm going to try to break open the center here, and we have our queens staring down at each other, but with me having the, let's call it the safer king, I don't want to trade queens, so I sidestep out of the way, and I'm attacking this weak pawn. I've got two pieces attacking it. The only defender right now from white is this bishop. So white needs to do something. He decides to move his king even further forward to defend. That's a very brave king right there. And right now, I have this really cool opportunity for an attraction sacrifice. Can you see it? Well, I don't see it right here. I actually move over to d8. I gain a tempo on the queen. That is gaining me time, gaining me more pieces into the game. And so he sidesteps over, and I have one more opportunity to see this. I'll give you just a couple of seconds to see this sacrifice. And if you found it, congratulations. It's really cool. It earns you a brilliant side right there. The whole point of this sacrifice is if the bishop captures, this pawn is no longer defended, and it is a forced checkmate in two. And let's just say that something different happens. Obviously, this rook is hanging for free. If the rook moves over, then you can just capture this bishop, removing the defender of this f4 square, and now you're threatening that same checkmate, and you've won a bishop and a pawn. What happens in the game is this bishop is captured, and I get checkmate in two. Attraction sacrifices don't always have to be super forcing and lead to checkmate right away. They can be a little bit more subtle, and this is a perfect example of that. It's going to lead to a double threat that my opponent is not able to deal with. I'll give you just a couple seconds here to see if you could find this really, really fun move. b5 here is just very, very fun. It's the best move on the board, and what's the idea of it? Well, my opponent does capture this pawn, and, technically moving back to b3 would have been a little bit better. I would have gained space on that move either way. But what happens after this pawn recapture? Well, I hope you can see it. It's moving the queen up to b6. So this bishop is undefended. The bishop needs to be defended or needs to move out of the way. I'm threatening all sorts of discoveries. The best one is right here, which is not the one I see in the game, which, would pick up a free rook. I'm also threatening to come over here and potentially fork the queen and the king. So my opponent, he moves backwards. I do move over here, and my opponent is forced to take that. Otherwise, he was going to lose his queen. And here in a couple of more moves, I again force some sort of response out of this bishop. The queen moves over. They're threatening my knight right here. I again move forward in the position, and with this bishop move over, I have an opportunity for a tactical advantage here, and it involves removing the defender. The only thing defending this knight is this knight right here. So if I was able to get rid of that, then, that would be great for me. So I do capture this knight. He recaptures this way, but this opens up the bishop right here to be captured. So I am able to go up two minor pieces for a rook. That's going to be better for me. Technically, the best move in this position is completely insane. I didn't see it in the game, but it is actually this move right here, threatening checkmate, in which case you would have some sort of crazy checkmate like this. There's other ways to play it, but, instead of that, I grab the bishop, grab this, and with this captures right here, my queen's being attacked, but my opponent is weak along the back rank. And in just a couple of more moves after I grab this, I'm threatening checkmate yet again, and my opponent resigns. Attraction sacrifices, they can be brilliant, they can be devastating, or they can be a little bit subtle, but they're always unexpected. And this is a great example. The unfortunate thing about attraction sacrifices is that it's not exclusively to you. Your opponent can also take advantage. In this case right here, my opponent is threatening my e7 pawn. And so what do? I defend it with my rook. And my opponent has an absolutely brilliant move that I do not see coming at all. He moves over. He's attacking my knight. I need to do something about this. I move forward and bam, he takes on a4 and he is trying to attract my rook off of the defense of this e7 square. That is unfortunately the best move in this position for me, and my opponent is able to win a couple of pawns for his trouble. And we can see here in just a couple of more moves, we're trading off pawns, and he is able to convert this into a winning endgame. Great tactic by my opponent and great win to him. Let's see a really fun attraction sacrifice that culminates in a very strong checkmate. In this position right here, my opponent has moved very far forward. And what do? I strike right back here. I force his bishop backwards. Technically speaking, I had an opportunity here instead of going here, forces back, here, forces back, here, forces back, and then traps the bishop. I didn't see any of that stuff. I went for, a little bit simpler of an approach, and I trade off this bishop, and I move my rook all the way forward. So right now, my rook looks a little bit out of place here, kind of in the center of the board by himself. And right here, my rook looks almost like he's trapped. He doesn't have any way to go back. So what does my opponent do? My opponent attacks my rook. We can see here that computer does not like that. That's a blunder. That's because I have an opportunity to gain some tempo. What's more valuable than my rook? My opponent's queen. So I attack that. I'm also attacking this bishop right here. The queen moves back, and I gain tempo yet again. Tempo is I counterattack. I force my opponent to respond. I'm developing my pieces as he is responding to my threats instead of creating his own. He moves over, and this is the moment that we've all been waiting for. Sacrifices the rook. And this rook sacrifice is an attraction sacrifice. Not only am I gaining a pawn right here, but it is forcing the king to move forward. And in making this sacrifice, the idea is that I'm going to have a ton of attackers. Right now, I already have this and this. I'm going to be able to move my queen over here with check. That's a third one. Hopefully, I'll be able to swoop my rook over. That's 4 attackers. And as that's happening, what is defending this king? Well, this rook's not doing anything. The queen's not doing anything. The bishop's only looking at these squares, which aren't being attacked. And then the knight is defending this square. So my opponent has like half of a defender. So let's see what happens. He captures. I move forward. And now I move my rook along that F file as well. I'm looking at maybe moving on to this square right here. That would actually be checkmate. So my opponent needs to respond. He attacks this way. And now I am threatening this rook here in the corner. I've got everything slicing down. All of my pieces are into the attack. My opponent tries to run away, attacks, brings my rook forward. If my opponent decides to defend this way, then I'd be able to pick up the knight because now the bishop would be pinned. So he keeps running away instead. I grab that. I grab this. I check. And we are in a checkmate situation. This is our final game. I mentioned that we're going to talk about the most common exchange sacrifices that you could use in your own game, but we start off with the Rossolimo Sicilian. This opening involves giving up your light squared bishop for your opponent's knight, but you're going to put all of your pawns on light squares themselves to compensate for that. I have an opening video out on it. You should check it out. The game progresses in pretty normal fashion. Like I mentioned, everything's going to end up on light squares. This square right here is going to be weak, and if my opponent starts pushing forward, then it will become even weaker. I counterattack here on the F file. That could end up being a little bit risky because we can see here that my opponent is getting into the game. This move is forced. It's getting a little bit scarier. We can see that my opponent does push this pawn, and so now this is a forever weakness for my opponent. My opponent is pushing over. He's trying to create problems. I'm attacking this weak c5 pawn. He defends. I move back with ideas of rerouting over this way, and my opponent just jumps in there and sacrifices for the attack. He ends up getting, for his 2 pieces, he gets a rook and 2 pawns. So technically he's up material, but I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces versus my opponent's 4 pieces. If I'm able to survive, I should have an advantage, but my opponent has, in his favor, these 3 passed pawns over on the king's side, and I have a wide open king. So anything could really happen here. My opponent moves forward. I am defending on the light squares because my opponent has total dark squared control over on the king's side, and my king is running away. Okay, there's all these pieces. There's these pawns charging down. I don't want any part of that. I get out of there. And we can see my opponent is putting the squeeze on. He is pushing his advantage forward. His advantage is those kingside pawns. I capture here. I go back up. We are back to even material. But more importantly, I'm bringing my knight back into the game to hopefully do something and make a little bit of a difference. My opponent pushes forward. There's only one move for me in this position. Hopefully you could see it. I can't be running backwards here because these pawns are going to just keep charging forward. So what do? I capture here on f3. It was really the only choice. Now we have an even amount of pieces, but my opponent is up a pawn, and it is this outside pass pawn. That's going to be a liability for me. My opponent moves over. I move back. We trade. And right here, we could see that my opponent gets a big blunder sign. This is the most common attraction sacrifice that you're going to see. You're going to see it a lot in your own games. I'll give you just a couple seconds to find it. And it is, of course, sacrificing your queen, but it's only a temporary sacrifice because what are we doing? We're trying to get, with this king taking right here, we are attracting the king to this fork. You should be looking for that all the time, especially when the queen is able to be attacked in 2 moves by your knight. If you could get the king over to one of those squares as well, you're going to have a great time. My opponent, he doesn't fall for it, but I did just win a rook, so that's pretty exciting. I move over here. I'm attacking the queen. The queen has to move. There are no checks. The only check is right here, but that gives up the queen for absolutely nothing. He moves over, check, and I move my bishop up. My opponent resigns right here because it is inevitable. Sacrifices are fun. If sacrifices didn't exist in the game of chess, it would be a much worse game and probably wouldn't be played nearly as much as it is now. They're surprising. They're amazing. My first video ever was on exchange sacrifices. While I don't stand by the quality of the video itself, I do stand by the content. I'll see you here next Friday, though, for more high-quality content that gets better and better each week. Have a great day, guys.